Welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into a text revered by millions globally, the Bhagavad Gita, often called the Divine Song. It's, well, widely considered a profound expression of Hindu philosophy.
Indeed. And our mission for this deep dive, it's maybe a bit different. We're exploring the Gita through a unique historical lens.
Right.
Specifically, an early 20th century examination from 1900.
Okay.
Yeah, this source, compiled from various writers back then, offers a fascinating critique.
Oh.
It highlights certain doctrines, definitely, but it also questions their practical implications, their consistency. You'll find it's a real shortcut to understanding some, well, surprising perspectives on this ancient text from that era.
So the Gita itself, it's a dialogue, isn't it, between Arjuna and Krishna?
Exactly. Arjuna the warrior, Krishna his guide, who is also divine.
And it supposedly tries to harmonize different schools of thought, like yoga, the Samkhya.
And the Vedanta, yeah. Trying to bring together ideas about spiritual discipline, consciousness, matter, the ultimate nature of reality. As we'll discover, it touches on these profound ideas about existence, duty, the divine.
But you mentioned the source. Does it talk about the history? Like who wrote it when?
Well, interestingly, our source notes that reliable historical information about the author or the composition time or even its exact literary place is almost impossible to ascertain.
Really?
Yeah, very little consensus among scholars, even back in 1900. But despite that ambiguity, its influence is just undeniable.
Okay, so let's start where the Gita itself starts. The deep dive begins with this really pivotal moment.
Right on the battlefield, Kurukshetra.
Arjuna stands between two armies, and he realizes he has to fight his own relatives. Grandsires, uncles, cousins.
Tutors, sons, brothers, his own people. And he's just overcome with this deepest pity. His limbs are failing, his mouth goes dry, he's trembling.
His famous bow, Gandiva.
Falls right from his hand. He basically says, I can't do this. He expresses this deep sorrow, seeing no happiness in killing his kin. He doesn't want victory or power if the people he cares about has to die for it.
Wow, that's such a powerful, very human moment of moral conflict. You can really feel his paralysis. So what does this all mean? How does Krishna respond to this profound grief, this reluctance to fight?
Well, Krishna's response is pretty stark. He doesn't really coddle Arjuna's feelings.
No.
No. He views Arjuna's pity as unworthy weakness, unmanliness, even base faint-heartedness.
Wrong words.
Very. He tells him it excludes him from having causes disgrace. He basically says, cast it off and stand up, fight.
Okay, so no gentle comforting. Just stand up and do your duty. So Krishna gives Arjuna, what, 3 main reasons to fight?
That's right. 3 core arguments.
Let's start with the first one. It's about the soul, right?
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the doctrine of the immortality of the soul. Krishna asserts the soul is unborn, it's everlasting, it never actually dies.
So weapons can't kill it, fire can't burn it.
Correct. It just transmigrates. Like, he uses the analogy of a person casting off old garments for new ones. The body's the garment, the soul moves on. And someone who is confirmed in this belief, Krishna says, isn't disturbed by anything that might happen. Birth, death, doesn't matter to the eternal soul.
So the core idea is the soul isn't truly affected by physical death.
Okay.
What's the second reason? Duty.
Duty, dharma. For a Kshatriya, the warrior class Arjuna belongs to, a lawful battle is the highest duty. It's righteous.
And beneficial.
Yes. Death in such a fight is seen as an open door to heaven. But conversely, abandoning your calling, your duty.
That's bad.
It means abandoning duty and honor. And that leads to sin, eternal disgrace. You'd be considered despicable.
Disgrace, in this context, worse than death for someone of high birth, makes sense within that warrior code. And the third reason?
This one's more philosophical, maybe.
Yeah.
Krishna says you should regard pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat as basically the same. Exactly. Cultivate indifference. This allows you to prepare for battle without incurring sin because you're not attached to the outcome. You're just doing your duty.
Detached action. This definitely raises a big question, which I think you mentioned the source gets into later. What happens when you try to apply these, transcendental doctrines to ordinary life?
Precisely. Our source provides some pretty pointed critiques on that later.
Okay. But before the critiques, the Gita also, as you said, tries to harmonize these different philosophies, Sankhya, yoga, Vedanta. What are some key ideas there about action and knowledge?
Well, the text indicates that action is actually preferable to inaction.
Oh, even with the detachment.
Yes, because without action, even bodily support isn't possible. You can't just sit still. It stresses performing your appointed work.
Your duty again.
Right. especially work done on account of sacrifice. But crucially, doing it without attachment to the fruit or the reward. That's the path, it claims, that leads to the supreme.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source we're using, the 1900 text, it notes that the Lord, Krishna, creates neither the faculty of working nor the works themselves.
Nor the connection between works and their results, their fruit.
Right. So who does?
Nature. Prakriti, the primordial material nature. It's Prakriti that operates.
Okay, Prakriti. And that leads to another crucial concept, right? The gunas.
Exactly. The gunas, or the qualities of Prakriti, there are three. Sattva, which is goodness, light, purity.
Okay.
Rajas, which is passion, activity, energy. And tamas, darkness, inertia, ignorance.
And how do these relate to God, according to the Gita?
Well, the Gita states that these natures, goodness, passion, darkness, they all proceed from God, from Krishna. But here's the twist. God is not in them, they are in God.
A subtle distinction. And within this framework, what's identified as the main enemy? The thing that gets in the way?
Krishna points to desire and wrath.
Okay.
Anger. He says they're born from the quality of passion, rajas.
Rajas again.
Yes. He calls them the insatiable, sin-filled foe that obscures the understanding, even of the wise. That's the real battle within.
The Gita also paints this picture of Krishna's divine nature being absolutely pervasive, right? He's like the core of everything.
Absolutely. He's described as the self seated in the heart of all beings, the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything that exists.
And he manifests in specific ways.
Countless ways. He says things like, I am Vishnu among the Adityas, the resplendent sun among shining bodies, the Sama Veda among the Vedas, Meru among mountain peaks.
So it's like the pinnacle of every category.
Exactly. The syllable OM among words, the Himalayas among mountains. He's also the rod of those who restrain and the policy of those who wish to conquer. It's about showing his presence in all aspects of existence, high and low, abstract and concrete.
So what does this all mean? He's presented as the seed of all things. Nothing exists without him.
And Arjuna even gets this overwhelming vision, right? The universal form.
Yeah, tell us about that.
It's described as this mighty, frankly terrifying manifestation. Many mouths, eyes, arms, legs, stomachs, fearful teeth. Arjuna is completely disturbed, terrified even.
Seeing God in this, like, all-consuming form.
Pervading absolutely everything. It's overwhelming. The text then explains this cosmic reality through two concepts, kshetra and kshetrajna.
Okay, what are those?
Kshetra is basically matter, the field, the body. Kshetrajna is the spirit, the knower of the field, the soul.
And their union.
Produces everything. But the Supreme Lord, the ultimate Kshetrajna, dwells equally in all beings and isn't destroyed, even when the bodies, the Kshetras, are destroyed.
So back to the soul. It doesn't act.
According to this part of the philosophy, no. The soul, the true self, being eternal and without qualities, never truly acts. All action is performed by Prakriti, by nature, through the gunas.
The soul is just watching.
A passive spectator, as the source puts it. The eternal Supreme Spirit, without beginning or qualities, doesn't act and isn't soiled or tainted by actions, even when it's embodied. Like the all-pervading sky, which isn't affected by what happens within it.
That has huge implications for responsibility, doesn't it? If the soul doesn't act.
Exactly. Our source definitely picks up on that implication later on.
Okay, so that lays out some core Gita concepts. Now let's shift to the critiques. Here's where the 1900 examination really begins its critical analysis. And the first thing it points out is this tension between polytheism and pantheism.
Yes, the source immediately flags that the poem seems to teach both simultaneously. Polytheism, the belief in many gods, is clearly there.
How so?
Well, the Gita refers to numerous gods. It even mentions a popular saying, of 33 crores, that's 300 to 30 million divinities, though sometimes it's reduced to just 33.
And sacrifices to these gods.
It says, those who sacrifice to the gods go to the gods. But it also warns that this reward is temporary. Even after feasting in Indra's heaven, their merit runs out, and they sink back into the mortal world. It's a transient gain.
And the source notes something even about demon worship.
Yes, it points out the Gita acknowledges demonolatry. The worship of Buddha is described as malignant demons living in burning grounds, and notes that this also secures its reward.
Okay, so that's the polytheistic side. What about pantheism?
Pantheism, the idea that God and the universe are one. The Gita explicitly states that God and the soul are one. Krishna declares things like earth, water, fire, ether, the heart, mind, and egoism. These form the eightfold division of my material nature. And crucially, I am the producer and the destroyer of the whole universe.
So God is the universe. What's the critique there from the 1900s source?
It highlights arguments from figures like Bishop Caldwell. He argued that if God is the soul of the world, it's material and efficient cause, and the world is God's body.
Then everything in the world is part of God.
Exactly. Everything. Every action. The critique says this doctrine knows no limits, implying even the basest animals and the most wicked actions are portions of God.
That's a strong claim.
And Professor Flint, also cited, argued that strict pantheism struggles with concepts like gratitude or trust in divine righteousness. It just commends contemplating this incomprehensible object.
So it needs the polytheism.
Flint argued it's forced to rely on polytheism, treating popular deities as persons because, as he put it, no people can worship what they believe to be entirely impersonal.
So what's the source's conclusion on this mix of polytheism and pantheism?
The source concludes pretty harshly. It suggests that pantheism, by allying with polytheism, acts as a power for evil.
Oh.
By sustaining superstition, corrupting philosophical systems, diluting the human mind, and arresting social progress. It even suggests that if pantheism secretly views popular gods as fictions, then associating with polytheism is a conscious alliance with falsehood and persistent care of hypocrisy.
Wow, okay. That's a heavy critique from that 1900 perspective. What else did the source take issue with? You mentioned the gunas earlier.
Right, the qualities goodness, passion, darkness. The source takes issue with the idea that these, including the negative ones like rajas, passion, and tamas, darkness, proceed from God.
It quotes Krishna saying,
Krishna says, "Know also that the natures which are of the quality of goodness and those which are of the quality of passion and of darkness are indeed all from me. I am not in them, but they are in me."
But the critique immediately follows, saying
Simply that God is holy and no evil desire can arise in him or from him. It sees a fundamental contradiction there based on his own theological premise.
Does this lead to other perceived contradictions in Krishna's words?
The source thinks so. It points to Krishna saying, "I am alike to all beings, to me none is hateful, none dear," which sounds impartial. But elsewhere, the Gita describes threats to demoniac people. Krishna says he casts them perpetually into the wombs of Asura's demons, and they go down to the vilest state without ever coming to me.
So not entirely alike to all beings, then?
The source finds these positions contradictory. Impartial on one hand, yet actively casting certain souls into demonic births on the other.
Okay. Now, moving on to another huge tenet, the eternal soul and transmigration. This comes under heavy scrutiny too, right?
Very heavy. The Gita, as we said, declares the self or soul is eternal, never born, never dies. An eternal portion of me, Krishna says.
And these souls can pass into basically anything.
Gods, demons, beasts, plants, even inanimate objects, according to the text.
What's the 1900 critique of that?
Our source deems this perfectly unphilosophical. It argues it's unnecessary and egregiously extravagant to assume countless eternal essences when one supreme essence could suffice.
It also says something provocative.
It suggests that if souls are truly eternal and self-existent, then, quote, we are a sort of miniature gods.
Huh. And back to the idea of the soul not acting.
Yes, the source brings that up again. If the soul is just a passive spectator and Prakriti does all the work,
then the soul has no guilt upon it.
Exactly. The source even cites a pundit who apparently argued that man's spirit was sinless and not responsible for what the body does.
Which has huge implications. Now, transmigration is often presented as an explanation for suffering, right? Why bad things happen to good people or vice versa.
Yes, the idea is that current suffering, say, an infant's agony might be due to sins in a past life, or a wicked person's prosperity could be from past merit.
But the source strongly criticizes the social impact of this belief.
Sharply. It asserts that this belief in transmigration is, in its view, answerable for all the unkindness shown to lepers and for the miseries of the 20 millions of widows in India at that time.
Why widows specifically?
Because, the source claims, widows were often treated unkindly, their sorrows attributed to their own supposed sins in some previous life.
So the belief quenches pity.
That's the argument. It quenches their natural instincts of pity and fosters this pervasive fatalism. The constant excuse for inaction or indifference becomes, what can we do? It is all the fruit of former birth.
The source even says murderers use this.
It claims even murderers comfort themselves with this excuse. It's presented as a doctrine that undermines personal responsibility and compassion in practice.
Okay. Now, the Gita does talk about action, but our source says, on the whole, it teaches that mental devotion, yoga, is superior.
Yes, the source argues that yoga, or mental devotion and discipline, is generally exalted above simple action in the Gita.
And the Gita gives instructions for yoga.
Oh yes, detailed directions. Various physical postures, the lotus posture, cow's mouth posture, fowl posture, bow posture, very specific physical disciplines.
And breath control, pranayama.
Absolutely. Specific techniques for regulating breath through the nostrils, even stopping the breath entirely for periods.
And the text claims some pretty amazing results from this.
Marvelous powers are attributed to advanced yogis. Unveiling the past and present, seeing invisible things, hearing distant sound.
Becoming stronger than an elephant, faster than the wind.
Gaining mastery over all things, even levitating or diving into the depths of the earth and ocean. Extraordinary claims.
But what does our 1900 source make of all this?
It's deeply skeptical. It asserts that these practices, if conscientiously observed, can only issue in folly and idiocy.
Ouch.
And then it pivots to a broader critique, asking what visible results the philosophy of the Gita has actually produced for India, societally speaking.
So it's questioning the practical, real-world impact again.
Exactly. Has it promoted popular education, civilization, good government, generous emotions?
Has it abolished caste, helped widows remarry, gotten rid of temple dancers, stopped polygamy, encouraged virtue, repressed vice?
These are the sharp questions the source poses. It also points out that it wasn't this philosophy, in its view, that abolished things like female infanticide, human sacrifice, raya, or widow burning, sati.
Nor brought railways and telegraphs.
Right. It implicitly contrasts the Gita's philosophy with the forces driving social change and technological progress in that era, asking about its tangible contribution.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even disturbing. One of the most controversial points raised by the source is the Gita's teaching that actions done without attachment do not defile.
And linked to that, the idea that virtue and vice can be seen as alike, as relative.
How does the source explain that?
It cites a compiled work from the period stating that virtue and vice, being relative terms, can never be applied to one who is regarded as the supreme being.
Implying God is beyond good and evil.
And it goes further, quoting, "The being who is equal in virtue as well as in vice is to us a grander being than the extremely virtuous man."
Wow. And this is presented as a key lesson from Krishna.
Yes, that Krishna, to teach this, treated vice and virtue alike. The core idea being that an action committed without attachment to the result is neither virtuous nor vicious. It transcends ordinary morality.
And the source gives a chilling example of how this could be misused.
It does. It mentions a man named Shapikar who was hanged for murder in Pune around that time. Apparently, he carried a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and according to the source, he justified his crime by the doctrine that actions performed without attachment do not defile.
That's deeply troubling. How does the source react to that interpretation?
It vehemently rejects it, calls it the worst false teaching, one that destroys the eternal distinction between right and wrong. It even invokes the biblical prophet Isaiah. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil.
So a total rejection of moral relativism, especially tied to divine sanction.
Absolutely. And closely related to this, for the source, is the doctrine of caste.
Which the Gita supports.
Yes, the Gita states that the fourfold divisions, Brahmins, priests, scholars, Kshatriyas, warriors, rulers, Vaisyas, merchants, farmers, and Sudras, laborers, servants, are a divine institution.
With duties based on their innate qualities.
Exactly. Duties apportioned according to the qualities born of their own natures. Tranquility and faith for a Brahmin, valor and courage for a Kshatriya, agriculture for a Vaisya, service for a Sudra.
And sticking to your own duty is key.
Being contented with one's own duty leads to perfection, it suggests, and intermingling castes. That's seen as a dire calamity.
Arjuna, being a Kshatriya, is told fighting is his duty, and he incurs no sin by doing it.
Right. Acting according to your caste means you incurreth no sin.
But our source argues this completely ignores universal morality.
Yes, it argues this teaching ignores the immutability of moral obligations. And it asks that provocative question. What shall we say then of the Kalars, the thief caste of the South?
Whose traditional caste duty was stealing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
How does incurring no sin by doing your duty apply there?
The source then lists a whole range of negative effects it blames on caste.
Several pernicious effects, yes. Causing disunion, making manual labor contemptible, checking commerce, causing physical degeneracy,
Suppressing individuality, denying spiritual culture to the majority.
and making the country fit for foreign slavery by previously enslaving the people by the most abject spiritual tyranny. It doesn't mince words.
It calls caste.
The most monstrous birth of human society, which hallows evil by the authority and sanction of religion. A very, very strong condemnation from this 1900 perspective.
Okay, another practical aspect the source examines is shraddhas. What are those?
Offerings made to the dead. The Bhagavad Gita itself mentions that forefathers, being deprived of pindas, food offerings, and water, fall from heaven.
So the dead need sustenance from the living.
That's the general Hindu belief highlighted by the source. The dead require nourishment for 3 generations, plus works of merit performed for their benefit by descendants.
And the source's view on shraddhas?
It labels them a curse to India, an obstacle to improvement.
Why?
Several reasons given. Their high expense, the way they support idle vagabonds in the source's view who should be working, and crucially, the impression they create.
Which is?
That a person's welfare in the afterlife depends mainly on offerings made after their death rather than on their own conduct during life.
Which the source argues
It gives encouragement to sin. It also ties this back again to the treatment of lepers and widows, suggesting it stems partly from that transmigration doctrine and the fatalistic mindset it believes these practices encourage.
Okay. Finally, the source touches briefly on bhakti, or devotion to Krishna, which the Gita really emphasizes.
Yes, bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, is highly exalted in the Gita. Krishna makes some powerful promises, like, even if one of evil life worshipeth me and not any other, he must certainly be deemed to be good, and they who worship me never perish.
Even just hearing the doctrine is beneficial.
The text states that simply hearing the doctrine in faith without reviling leads to liberation, to the happy world of the virtuous.
But the source connects this back to the detachment critique.
It does. It suggests, again, that this emphasis on devotion could be interpreted, especially when combined with the action without attachment idea, as allowing for morally questionable acts like killing relatives, as long as it's done with devotion and detachment, thereby incurring no defilement.
So the Gita places huge value on knowledge, gnosis. Our source makes an interesting comparison here.
A fascinating historical parallel, yeah. It describes how the early Christian church had to contend with Gnosticism.
The knowers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Systems whose followers called themselves knowers and often looked down on mainstream Christianity as a religion of mere faith.
And these Gnostics offered complex systems.
Tremendous, elaborate accounts of the universe, cosmology, and they enjoined really minute and arduous ascetic discipline to reach direct intuition or gnosis.
So what's the point of the comparison?
The source notes that these complex Gnostic systems, well, they flourished for a time, attracted many disciples, and then they passed away, while the religion of faith, Christianity, survived.
Why? What's the source's explanation?
It argues Gnosticism was ultimately a religion of the head rather than of the soul and heart, and it couldn't satisfy the deeper cravings of the human spirit. Too intellectual, perhaps, not relational enough in its view.
And the examination then concludes by listing some final deficiencies it sees in the Gita.
Yes, summarizing its critique. It states the Gita nowhere exhibits any sense of the evil of sin considered as a violation of law, and makes no provision for the reestablishment of the authority of the divine lawgiver by the expiation of sin. These are key points from its theological perspective.
After all these critiques, the 1900s source finishes by presenting what it sees as the alternative, right? Drawing from Christianity.
Exactly. It presents a strong counterpoint, pointing to Jesus Christ, whom it describes using the term nishkalank, meaning spotless, and avatara, or incarnation without defect. Again, we have to stress this is the argument of the 1900s source we're examining.
And it portrays Jesus as fulfilling a human need.
Yes, meeting the human yearning for sympathy. A unique figure, it says, combining personal originality with profundity of thought. It highlights his teachings on love. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you.
And forgiveness, even while dying.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The source emphasizes this radical love and forgiveness.
And it makes some very sweeping historical claims about Christianity's impact.
Extremely sweeping, yes. It claims Christianity has regenerated and softened mankind more than philosophers or moralists. And, using the language of its time, it says Christianity raised painted savages to the forefront of civilization.
We should definitely note that phrasing reflects the specific dated perspective of the 1900 source itself.
Absolutely critical to note that. The source argues Christians march in the van of all that is great and glorious in the human race, citing figures like Milton, Newton, Johnson, Shakespeare as examples of its positive influence.
And the final pitch from the source is?
It argues that Christianity alone offers a savior for the burden of guilt, provides divine help in the battle with evil, and promises the Savior's presence at death, leading to a blessed immortality. That's the conclusion presented in this historical text.
Wow. Well, our deep dive into this early 20th century examination of the Bhagavad Gita has certainly given us a very specific and nuanced perspective.
Definitely nuanced. It reveals not just the profound ideas within the Gita itself, but also how those ideas were received, interpreted, and critically engaged with in a particular historical and, frankly, cultural context.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it, between these abstract, philosophical, spiritual ideals
and their perceived practical consequences. How they supposedly play out in terms of morality, society, individual lives, at least as seen through the lens of this 1900 critique.
Yeah, this historical analysis really pushes us to think about how different worldviews grapple with those universal human questions: duty, suffering, the nature of God, good and evil.
Absolutely.
So it leaves you wondering, when we engage with texts like the Gita, profound, revered texts, what criteria do we use or should we use to evaluate their teachings?
Is that their intellectual complexity, their internal consistency, their spiritual depth?
Or is it, as this source heavily implies, their tangible impact on human conduct, on societal well-being? How do we measure that?
It raises a really important question. How do different traditions even define what the highest perfection is, let alone how to achieve it?
What stands out to you from looking at the Gita through this very particular, somewhat challenging historical lens? Something to think about.